Alright, I'm getting warmed up. You gotta get sucked up for these things. Alright, my name is Matthew Scott and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. This is exclusively for EDIUS World for Grass Valley. They've just updated their latest NLE to version 7.4. And I'm going to be talking about a whole lot of new cool features in the direction of where EDIUS is heading. But I'm also going to be talking about craft editing and what the hell is craft editing. This is the face of a craft editor, Maxim Jago, one of the coolest names in the biz. Awesome dude. And anyway, check out EDIUS World. There's a whole bunch of free tutorials here, not just for EDIUS. It covers everything from plugins to editing solutions to third-party software and basically just how to get the most out of your NLE. So make sure you check that out. You can even download demo products and 30-day trials of EDIUS, which is really cool as well. So the biggest thing for me with EDIUS 7.4 is mostly the direction it's heading and how it's being viewed by the industry and how it's finally being seen as a serious craft editor. So it's been a powerful editor for a long time, but Grass Valley are really focusing on expanding their NLE solution to fit in with existing solutions in production houses. For example, a lot of news stations are now taking on EDIUS as their news editor. One, because EDIUS is known for its speed and its codec support and its stability and its network support and all that sort of thing. But now finally EDIUS is branching out and allowing us to use things like third-party hardware, third-party software to finish our projects with, and let's just quickly cover some of the things I'm talking about. So originally EDIUS only used to support Grass Valley output cards and Grass Valley hardware, but now EDIUS is supporting things like Blackmagic Decklink cards, so we can monitor in 4K and 1080p using third-party hardware. And it's not just limited to Blackmagic, we can also use Matrox cards, we can use the new AJA cards as well. So this is like really exciting stuff, and it just means that the PC platform, which is what EDIUS is created for, it's back to being flexible again, and that's what, for me, that's part of the reason why I'm a PC guy, because I do love flexibility and I love choice. But before we jump into EDIUS, I just want you to try something for me. Just go over to Google, and I just want you to type a couple of things for me, just see how this goes. I mean, for one, we all know that Google is a respectable, trustworthy company who would not lie to us. Okay, that's unanimous across the world. Everyone trusts Google, right? And so what we're going to do is we're just going to type a few things in Google and just see what comes up. Let's start with A for Avid, and we're just going to type in Avid is. Okay. Interesting. Avid is a waste of time. Avid is dead. Okay. Let's just go ahead and type another word in here. Let's type Premiere Pro is. Slow, lagging. Interesting. Okay. Alright, let's go ahead and try typing Sony Vegas is lagging, not responding on it. Okay. Interesting. Free. Okay. Let's have a look at EDIUS is. Hey! EDIUS is good. EDIUS is 64-bit. EDIUS is software. And let's ignore this one. EDIUS is incorrect, maybe when used on a Mac, that's for sure. But I thought that was a fun little game, and the reason I typed that in is because over the past year or so, maybe 2 or 3 years max, there's been a huge change in the professional world of NLEs. And that's because, mostly, Final Cut Pro 7 had a real strong hold on the industry, and so did Avid as well. But things are changing, man. Times are changing, and there are other software options out there. So EDIUS 7.4 is a professional NLE, and I'm going to show you some really awesome color correction techniques, editing techniques, and things that maybe you just didn't know about EDIUS 7. So let's have a look at a couple of things that I would suggest define a craft editor. Basically, if you're a craft editor, you want to have as much control as possible over the image and your editing abilities and the tools available to you. You don't want to be limited by bit depth. You don't want to be limited to, say, broadcast standard resolutions only. We can have custom resolutions. You don't want to be limited to resizing algorithms. We can change the resizing algorithm. We don't want to be limited to the number of video and audio tracks. We want to be able to nest sequences. We need blending modes. We need all this stuff to be able to create the best possible finished, crafted image. So a few of the things that really stand out for EDIUS and sort of separate it from other NLEs, things like camera and format support. If we go to EDIUS World and go to the support section, you'll be able to find a detailed list of all of the camera formats that EDIUS supports. I remember way back when the 5D Mark II was first released and it was recording, H.264 MOVs, and it was stuck at, exactly 30 frames per second, for example. EDIUS was the first NLE to support that file. You couldn't even bring that into another NLE, you know what I mean? So EDIUS is always at the forefront of supporting new camera formats. What else is important to a craft editing solution? Well, you have to have a high-quality intermediate codec. And when I say you have to, that's actually changing as well. Like, times are changing, like I said before, but intermediate codecs are still very, very useful and very important to a high-end finishing workflow. So everyone's heard of ProRes, and that's exactly what ProRes is. ProRes is an intermediate codec. Grass Valley have their own codec, and it's called the Grass Valley HQX codec. And you can find all the information you need to know about the codec here. But just briefly, HQX is a 10-bit codec that supports alpha channels, and it supports 60p 4K, but actually supports up to 8K as well, DCI 8K, which is, it's freaking awesome. So let's have a quick look at this slide that I created. I'm not going to go too far into this because it's even confusing for me, but basically what we are going to look at, three sort of formats that exist in the world for an editor. So the first sort of format is the format that the camera records natively. Now, depending on the camera that you record with, the format will be different. And when I say format, every camera records its own type of compression or own type of lack of compression sometimes as well. But each camera has their own different type of format, and that format generally is designed to maximize the amount of brightness values, color values, detail, and basically a higher end camera will try and retain as much information as possible without compressing it. But unfortunately, what we notice is, with things like DSLR cameras and other prosumer cameras, they're actually recording to a delivery format which is not designed to hold on to all that information. Delivery formats are designed to save space. They're heavily compressed, but they're compressed very cleverly in order to maintain detail and color fidelity. But the problem is, once that's sort of been baked in, or once that compression has happened, doing any sort of editing or color correction or any sort of craft editing, you seriously become limited because the bit depth, the color sampling, the resolution, the macro blocking, all of these things start to destroy the image, especially when you start pushing it around in the edit phase. So just to recap, depending on the camera you use, it's going to record to different sort of formats. Now, each one of those formats is often held in a container. So this is where it starts to get confusing because, for example, the 5D Mark II records .mov files, but MOV has so many uses and can actually be used for intermediate codecs, for delivery formats, and for recorded formats. So it's literally just a container, but what's important is what's inside of that container. So with the 5D Mark II, there's actually a delivery format inside that container, and that's why editing 5D Mark II footage or color correcting 5D Mark II footage can sometimes be troublesome. So when you sort of step up the game and you start shooting with a RED camera, for example, they have a much better, much less compressed codec that is more in line with what we call an intermediate codec. So let's have a quick look at what an intermediate codec is, and that's exactly what the HQX codec is we just had a quick look at. Same with ProRes, Avid's DNX HD, Cineform, and there's others as well. But these codecs are designed to have the highest quality picture, and one thing that's not really taken into account is file size. We don't really care how big that file is, we really just care about how far we can push it around in post. But not only are they designed to maintain maximum information, because there are lots of formats out there that do that, like Cinema DNG, for example, which retains a lot of information. The problem with Cinema DNG is it's not very edit friendly, so it's not very good in the intermediate phase. So as soon as you bring Cinema DNG sequences into an editing timeline, it's going to struggle. You're not going to be able to play that back in real time, and the workflow is just crippled. So that's why an intermediate codec was developed. And the intermediate codec is friendly to the CPU, where a Cinema DNG codec, for example, is not. So the intermediate codec tries to hold on to as much information as possible while also giving your computer room to breathe, basically. So these are the three sort of basic formats that we look at from a craft editing point of view, working with different departments. So enough of the nerdy, boring talk about technical codecs and all this sort of crap. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a craft editor has more of a responsibility to finish something at a higher grade, to make it look that little bit better. So why don't we go ahead and start looking at some of the creative aspects that a craft editor needs to address, and have a look at how EDIUS supports that sort of creative workflow. Alright, so we've started a new project. Let's quickly have a look at the project setting. So we're working in 4K DCI at 23.98 frames per second. And let's go ahead and import some footage. Now this is one thing that I love about EDIUS, just right off the bat, is when you're importing footage, I might just right click here, try and stay organized, and create a footage folder. And I might also create an audio folder and start importing footage into the footage folder, audio into the audio folder, etc. But there's a much easier, much quicker way to do that. If we just have a quick look at my hard drive here, you'll see that I have that folder structure already existing on my hard drive. So basically I do try and stay organized, and I do try to keep everything in their nice little neat folders. But what's cool about EDIUS is, if we just go back to our bin, we can right click, choose open folder, and as long as we're pointing to that directory, press OK. EDIUS is automatically going to bring in all of the clips and all of the folders that are on that hard drive in the same structure. So this does save a lot of time, and yeah, it's really cool. So let's have a look at some of the footage that I'm lucky enough to be able to share with you today. One of them is from a film that I shot called Mr. Ghost, directed by Jad Olivier, and another film is a drama that I shot in Melbourne, written and directed by Rahul Prasad, and it's called Some Kind of Beautiful. And we have some really beautiful footage that we're going to take a look at, both from a critical viewpoint and an editor's viewpoint, and just see what we can do with this footage when we have our craft editing hats on. So maybe before we start editing a sequence, let's just have a look at a singular clip or a single shot, and have a look at how we might want to enhance it, or bring out the best in that shot. What we're looking at here is a clip that is 4K. Let's right click and choose properties, and we can see that it's DCI 4K, so 1496 by 2160. And it's been rendered from its native RED format into the intermediate codec. Now remember, we spoke briefly about intermediate codecs and what they do and why they're useful. In this case, we're using Grass Valley's HQX codec, which is 10-bit, and I'm going to show you how amazing this codec is in terms of holding on to information, but also allowing flexibility, real-time performance, etc., while we're being a craft editor. So let's go ahead and have a look at this shot. So full screen, you can see that this shot is actually a 16 by 10 ratio. That is the 4K DCI ratio. So before we go any further, we really need to think about our final output. So what is this clip going to be finally rendered or delivered to? So we actually framed this film for a CinemaScope ratio, or 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio, and that's why you can see this boom in shot here, because we actually framed it for a much narrower aspect ratio. But at the moment, we're looking at the full scope. So what we need to do is fix that. And one of them would be to actually use a black mask and mask out the top of the frame and the bottom of the frame that you do not want in your shot. And the other way is actually to create a project that is the exact ratio that you're looking for. Now, both ways are acceptable. Depending on the delivery format that you require, you can choose which way is more suitable. But I do prefer to work in the actual aspect ratio and pixel measurement that you will be delivering in. So let's go ahead and have a look at changing that. Now the reason I switched from full screen view back to this view is because of this blue box. Now this blue box shows us the actual final output size. Now remembering that our output size, if we go to project settings here, our output size will be 4096 by 2160, but we actually want to output in a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio. So there's a number of ways to do that. We could just place, say, a black piece of video on top of this track and cut out the middle of it, for example, and that would just mask the top and the bottom. Another way to do it is actually to look at the layout properties of this clip. So if we go ahead and click on the clip on the timeline, and then we make sure we have our information window open, then you can see that there's a little layouter option here. Now every single clip has its own layout properties, so if we go ahead and double click on that, we now have access to all of the properties of that clip, its dimensions, its position, its rotation. You can even transform that in 3D space, for example, and all of these properties are also keyframeable. And speaking of real-time performance, all of this can happen in real time with no rendering, full resolution in 4K. I mean, this is blow-away stuff. But let's go ahead and reset that, because what I wanted to show you is how we could mask the top and the bottom of this frame. So what we need to do now is just go up to the crop section, and then we can literally just crop this like so. And as you can see, now we're looking more along the lines of a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio, and obviously we could do it exact, but you get the idea. This is one way to do it, but the reason I've shown you this method is because even though we're masking for a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio, our final delivery output is still full DCI 4K, and that is represented by this blue box here. We will actually be exporting the video with black bars. So what if I wanted to export a native aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1? Well, this is something that I love about EDIUS. So let's go ahead and delete this clip and re-drop it back on the timeline. And what we're going to do now is go to settings and just have a look at our project settings again, and we're going to have a look at our frame size. So let's go ahead and change the current settings. And the frame size at the moment is using a standard frame size. All of these frame sizes are either broadcast standard or delivery standard frame sizes. But the cool thing about EDIUS is you can actually customize that frame size. So if we click on custom, and we go 4096, which is the width, and we're going to change the height to 1743. Now, as long as our pixel aspect ratio is 1:1, this is going to give us a 2.35:1 aspect ratio for 4K delivery. Let's go ahead and press OK and see what happens. Now, keeping in mind, we're talking about the blue box here. This is what's representing the final output dimension. So even if we go full screen, you might be thinking, well, it hasn't really changed. It's just sort of, we still have the full frame and it's just been shrunk down. And that's actually true, but what's important here is the frame size is now 2.35:1 4K. What we need to do now is click on the clip, and as you can see, EDIUS has shrunk the video down to fit the height. Now, it's good that EDIUS does this automatically because it means that we can see all of the video available to us, so it's not cropping anything off automatically. So what we need to do is go back to the layout properties of this clip, and instead of cropping this time, we're going to go to the Transform tab, and then we can actually grab this and stretch it ourselves. Or if we just go to the Preset tab here and go Fit Width and double click that, it'll automatically fit the width to the size of the composition or the size of the project. And now that that has happened, we have the ability to tilt this up and down. And this is really cool because it gives you another option in post as a craft editor to really start refining and thinking about creative ways to make the most of your footage. But let's just leave that there as is and press OK. And now what you can see is 2.35:1 4K. That will be our final delivery aspect ratio with the right pixel measurements as well. But let's start having a look at editing this creatively. How are we going to make the most of this shot? Well, when he's walking around the corner here, I love the framing, it all looks good. But when he gets around here, I feel like his headspace, there's not enough headspace. So maybe I'd want to tilt that up slightly. Let's go a step further than that. I'm going to start looking at keyframing those properties that we looked at a second ago. And just when he's looking at himself in the mirror there, and just before the lady walks in. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is just trim the end of that clip. And let's go back to the beginning. So what I'll do is go to the properties of the clip, double click the layout, and here's our timeline here. Now what I want to do is, by the time he starts walking about here, I'm going to set a keyframe for all properties, and I'm just going to scrub through here to the point of where he sort of leans into that window. And about here, let's just zoom this out to maybe 10%. What I can do now is just manually zoom that in and reposition this frame. So imagine we had a zoom lens or a dolly on the day. So this is the sort of look I'm going for. Maybe here I'll just tilt that down. And if we set an easy ease keyframe on this last keyframe, so we right click and go Bezier, what that's going to do is, let's press play now, see what happens. So we've got this beautiful smooth dolly in. Now remember, this is happening in real time. Our buffer's still above 1, so there's no rendering here, full resolution. And we've got this fake camera move that's starting to look pretty cool. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, hold on a second, when you expand something beyond 100%, any image for that matter, it starts getting soft and you start having pixel problems because you're actually creating pixels out of nothing. And that's generally true, and depending on the source footage that you have, depends on how far you can push that fake dolly move. But what's unique about EDIUS and really cool about EDIUS is that we can go to the parameters and we have a look at our stretch value. So at the beginning it's 100%. We haven't stretched it beyond its original size. But by the time we get to the middle and to the very end, we've stretched it 50% beyond its original size. We're at 150% roughly. So what we need to look at is the resampling method. How is it creating those extra pixels? What we can actually do is change the resampling method to Lancos 3 high quality, and this is going to give us a much higher quality, much better detail when we're resizing above 100%. Okay, so things are looking pretty good. We've got 2.35:1 aspect ratio, we've got a fake dolly move. So what else can we do to this shot? Now remember, we're working with an intermediate codec that not only holds and retains pixel and color information, detail information, it also allows the computer to not have to decode so much and be so intensive on the CPU. So let's go ahead and mark an in and an out point here. And what I'm going to do is just loop this playback. So we'll just press loop. And now you can see this is playing back in real time, and that animation that we've done and the aspect ratio correction we've done is happening in real time. So while that's happening, let's go over to effects, and what I want to do now is add some contrast to this shot because it's looking a little bit flat. So we'll go to color correction filters, go to the YUV curve, and drop that on our clip. Now the clip is still playing, remember that. Now in the information tab, the same place we found our layout properties. So now we can add some contrast here, and I'm just going to do that in real time. So as I push this curve around, you can see it happening in real time while that dolly move is happening as well. So let's go ahead and add some contrast here. So that's looking pretty cool. And we can always split before and after. And this is happening in real time. I'm going to keep saying that. You're going to get annoyed, but it's freaking cool. So this is happening in real time. Let's go ahead and have a look at the color tone of this film. Now we did actually deliberately shoot this blue, but what we're going to do now is have a look at changing that. We're just going to balance it out some just by pushing some orange into the midtones and crushing the blacks a little bit more gently, and also desaturating the blacks, maybe pushing a little bit the opposite of blue into them. And we can increase saturation in the mids and just try and balance out that blue a little bit. So now you can see we've got the color of the wood back in, but we still have a blue tone coming through. And the cool way to always see what you've done is split the screen and have a look before and after. So EDIUS is doing this in real time, but the amazing thing is it's not dropping resolution. It's still full 4K, full resolution. And remember, we have that beautiful camera move in there as well. So this is super cool that we can even do this. I'm going to try and go a step further while that's still playing, and let's see if we can do this in real time. I'm going to drop now a mask filter on. So once again, our information tab comes up. We have a layout property there doing the fake dolly move. We've got a YUV curve for contrast. We've got a three-way color corrector to adjust the color. We can turn those on and off. Now what I want to do with the mask is I want to try and emphasize some of this light coming through the window. So what we're going to do is go ahead and add a fake shaft of light just using the pen tool. And if I'm going over these filters a little too quickly, make sure you check out all the tutorials at EDIUS World, or some of the tutorials at my blog, Matt's Got Visuals, and I go through this in much more detail and a lot slower as well. But what we're doing now is just creating a mask that's going to allow us to add a filter inside or outside of that mask. And in this case, we want to add a filter on the outside of the mask. Basically what I want to do is darken everything on the outside. So we go over to the outside properties, choose filter, and remember this is still playing in the background, pretty cool. And we'll go down to YUV curve again, and if we just open the properties of that YUV curve, now we can start playing with the brightness outside of the mask. Do I need to say that this is happening in real time? No, I don't. So pretty cool. Problem is, it doesn't really look very convincing because we need to soften the edge of that mask. So we can go ahead and do that. Just click soft under edge, and let's soften it by maybe 800 pixels, and boom. Now if we press OK, this is still happening in real time, no rendering. Let's turn the mask on and off, and we're just subtly adding a little bit more contrast, focusing our attention a little bit more to the center where this guy's walking, and placing emphasis on those shafts of light coming through the window. How awesome is this that you get instant feedback for any sort of craft editing or any sort of creative work that you're doing without having to render? This is one, the power of EDIUS and its amazing real-time engine, but also we're utilizing an intermediate codec that is quite advanced as well. A 10-bit codec that holds on to a lot of detail, a lot of color information, and this allows us to work creatively, quickly, and in real time. Now there's one more thing I wanted to point out before we move on, and that's the fact that EDIUS actually works in a 10-bit color space. So if we just go back to the beginning of this clip, for example, I'm just going to delete all of these filters really quickly, and let's just go Settings, Project Settings, Change Current Settings, and just have a look at the video quantization bit rate that our project is currently set at, which is 8-bit. So let's leave that at 8-bit for a second, and I'm just going to go to the Layout tool, and we're just going to delete our nice keyframes here and just shift this down a little bit because there's something I just want to show you. So let's go ahead and go to Effects, YUV Curve, and what we're going to do is just create quite a contrasty curve here. The goal of this is not to show you a nice grade, but it is to show you what's called posterization and how an 8-bit versus 10-bit color space can really help. So say we were happy with this ultra high contrast grade, maybe we are. Let's go ahead and have a look at this full screen for a second. Now you can see up here we have some pretty severe what's called banding or artifacting, and basically this is a separation of tones in an 8-bit color space. We don't have enough color information in an 8-bit color space to create the contrast that we have with that curve smoothly. So what we're going to start seeing is a separation in these tones because we don't have enough bit depth to support the color correction that we've done. But all we need to do is just go Settings, Project Settings, change Current Settings, and change the video quantization bitrate to 10-bit and press OK. Now we haven't done anything except change that. Let's have a look at full screen and check it out. All the banding is gone. So there's no banding here. We have a beautiful separation. We've increased the bit depth from 8-bit to 10-bit, which means that per color channel we now have 4 times more information. So originally we used to have 255 shades of red, 255 shades of green, and 255 shades of blue. But now we have over 1,000 shades of each one of those colors. And this allows us to create much smoother, and much more graduated, and much more extreme color corrections without running into artifacting problems like banding. Pretty sweet. Now the cool thing is, once again, this sort of adjustment is happening in real time with no rendering. So let's have a look at some other footage now, and this time we're going to actually edit together a sequence of shots. So I have a couple of scenes here from Some Kind of Beautiful. I'll just start with this wide shot here. So I'm just going to add an in point here and an out point there. And I can just add that to the timeline with the Add to Timeline shortcut or using one of these buttons, Override or Insert. So now we have that on the timeline, but just like earlier, we need to adjust this footage to fit the 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio. So if we go to the Information tab, double click the layouter, go to the presets and fit width, and then we can just reframe that accordingly to how we like it, which looks pretty good about there. Alright, let's go to our next shot now. So we go to the bin and we can just scrub back and forth and have a look at that. Just using my JKL keyboard shortcuts here to navigate through this footage. So Mum sits down, and let's just have a look at this. See how quick and snappy this timeline is. And what we could do is click on the clip, go to the information, double click layouter just like we did a second ago. Or, if I just cancel that, I can go to my original clip where I've already made those changes, click on it once and drag the layouter to my next clip, and it'll automatically take those layout properties with it. And let's just find an edit point for our next shot. Maybe where Mum leans forward. Out there. Alright, so say we wanted to cut to this wide shot, for example. I mean, you probably wouldn't cut to a wide shot right now, we'd probably cut to a reverse, but I just want to show you something anyway. And I want you to start thinking about what a craft editor could or would do, or what the differences are, and why EDIUS helps us with that sort of creative process. So what I'm going to do now is just cut to a section here where her mum gets a phone call, and then she stands up out of frame. So I'm going to drop that on the timeline. And let's just see how that cuts. Cuts like shit, but it doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and fit this to the width of our comp. So if we go Information, Layouter, go to the preset and fit width. And we could just have a look, see how that goes. Cool. So I'm looking at this shot, and even on the day when I was shooting it, I wish I had a Chapman dolly or some way of sort of booming the camera up to give her a little bit more headroom. But also on the day, I'm thinking in post that we can totally do that ourselves. So let's have a look at animating this camera just like we did earlier, but this time I'm going to animate straight up just as she gets up. So what we'll do is we go here, allow keyframes for all properties, even though technically we only need to keyframe the position, so we could just do that. So we've added a keyframe for position. We can right click and choose Bezier, and that's just going to allow us to ease into this animation. And by the time she gets there, I'm going to just lower the camera's position. Let's just have a look at how that plays back in real time in 4K. Alright, so that kind of looks okay. Probably going a little bit far, and I could probably end it a little sooner. But you know what, I'm not really happy with this composition. And I just feel like it's not balanced enough. There's too much negative space on the left. And I probably should have framed it a little tighter on the day. So what I might do now is just frame it a little tighter right now. So what we can do is make sure keyframes are off, The first thing we want to do is just increase the size of this shot and just reframe it a little bit. I feel like that framing's much nicer. And now she definitely needs some help because obviously half of her face is chopped off by the top of the screen. So let's go back to this point here, add a keyframe for the position. Make sure it's easy ease, or make sure it's a Bezier keyframe. And then we're going to animate it down like so. And just see how that looks. No rendering. I love this stuff. We can see straight away if this is going to work. And look how perfectly that worked. If you're watching this for the first time and you'd never seen this tutorial, there's no way you'd pick that in the cinema and say, yep, that was done in post, that camera move. It's perfectly smooth. It's awesome. Now remember, we can always go to the layout properties and make sure that that camera move is resampling at the highest quality possible. Remember, this is still happening in real time. Alright, let's go ahead and have a look at our next shot, because I also want to play with that as well. So here we are with the daughter sort of listening in from a distance, and she's not really happy with what she's hearing. So let's add that to our timeline. And once again, let's have a look at how we can enhance this shot and use EDIUS's creative tools to make this, to take it to the next level. So we get information. First thing we want to do is fit width of our composition. Fit width of our 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio. And what I'm thinking is we do a slow push as soon as she looks up. So we add a keyframe for stretch and position. And over time, over this amount of time, we're going to zoom that in just a little bit and reframe it as well. Let's just have a look at that in real time. And I might just start it a little earlier, so just before she looks up. And what we can do is right click, make sure they're Bezier keyframes. And let's go ahead and have a look at this in real time. And here it comes. Beautiful. It just adds that extra bit of drama that you want. And that's what a craft editor looks for. He's not just cutting together a news story, he or she. A craft editor is looking for those extra little details that can really help enhance the story. Also, I'd just like to take this opportunity to really thank Rahul and Angela for letting me use this footage in this tutorial. It's really good to be able to teach stuff or demonstrate things with, one, footage that I've been intimately involved with. I mean, I shot this footage and I worked with the crew to make this stuff happen. But two, it's good to be able to use footage that is of high quality, you know, without trying to sort of blow my own trumpet here or anything, but it is good to be able to use footage that has been used in a real-life production. This film in particular has only just been edited and color graded not long ago, and it's heading to the festival circuit, and you guys should be able to see it soon, so it's pretty exciting for us. And yeah, it's just great that I get to use this to help sort of demonstrate editing concepts and ideas and post-production stuff. So thank you so much, Rahul and Angela. And also thank you, Jad, for letting me use footage from Mr. Ghost as well. It's just, yeah, I thank you guys so much. It's awesome. So we'll head over to the police station scene now. We may as well start with this ultra-wide shot here. So this was shot with an 11mm lens. I rarely break out that lens, but man, that room was tiny. So we just got the sergeant in here, and she comes in and sits down. So let's go ahead and place that on our timeline. And we'll fix up the framing in a second. So just as she sits down, maybe we'll cut to the slightly tighter shot. She just sits down. I'm just going to bring that back there a little bit. So I don't have all the shots here to really cut this together properly, but just to give you an idea and just for something for us to work with here. Because I want to show you how we're going to match these shots with color correction in a second, and also how to just enhance them a little bit as well. Actually, I'm going to enhance these a lot. I'm going to go Michael Bay style on this clip. Okay. So she's packing up. She's just about to leave, and then she gets called back by the sergeant. So maybe what I'll do is cut into that about here. Okay. Well, maybe when that guy's walking behind her, that'll be my cut point. So we find this shot and just trim those up a little bit. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And she stands up. And then maybe we cut to this reverse now. And that, oh, sitting back down. You're in trouble. Alright. And we'll just trim that up a little bit as well. Okay. Looking pretty good. We've got to fix up this framing in a second. Let's just jump back to this shot again. Sergeant has his final words. Gets up and leaves. I might just bring that in a little tighter. And let's cut back to her finally, because I'm going to do, you guessed it, that slow dolly push in at the end as well. So Sergeant gets up to leave. Maybe we'll just have a couple of frames of him leaving. And yeah, that beautiful ending is going to look so good. Okay, let's trim that out a little bit. Alright, so our movie is looking pretty cool. So now we're going to go in and just adjust the framing a little bit. So first thing, let's go to the information tab for that first clip and fit the width. Now remember, I said this was shot with an 11mm lens, so either way I'm going to be cutting either feet or heads off unless we animate this shot. So maybe, what's more important, his feet or his head? Well, maybe, it might sound like a stupid question, but maybe these guys are more important than him right now. We just need to know that there's a sergeant there. So maybe if we start the shot off like this, and what we could do is pull back. So we've started it zoomed in. So let me just zoom out here just to show you what I've done. So I've zoomed this shot in a little bit and just reframed it over here. And by the time the end happens, I'm going to go back to its original size. Looks a bit dodgy, but you get the idea. I just want you to be able to think about these things, play with them, and basically just experience what it's like to have an idea and see it happen in real time in full resolution, so you know if it's going to work or not. That's the whole point of this. So I'm just going to cancel that because I didn't like it. And I'm just going to leave it as is. So we'll go layout, we'll fit width, and I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, she comes in, and now what I'm going to do is just go to the second clip. I could copy and paste the layout properties from the first clip to the second one. I think that looks pretty good. But if I was to be picky about this second shot, it's not exactly level. See, unfortunately what I've done is use the window as a leveling device, but that's not what I should have done. I should have used the table as a leveling device. Thankfully we can fix that right now, so let's go to the layout properties. Let's frame this down a little bit. Let's zoom it in a little bit. And then what we can do is go to the rotation properties. We can just rotate that somewhere about there. Maybe reframe it slightly. Okay, so now that shot is nice and level. See how quick all this stuff's happening? Maybe just reframe it down a little bit. Just be careful not to add any black into the top right hand corner of the frame there. So that's looking pretty good. All happening in real time, loving it. Those guys get up to leave, we make our cut point. So let's have a look at this second shot now. Fit the width of that. Reframe it down a little bit. You know what? What I might do is keyframe a little camera move here. Just from there to there. Just Bezier that. It's better. Subtle little differences. They all make a difference, and they all make the film look a lot nicer. Trust me. If you pay attention to these things in post, it is what is going to separate your film from the others. Taking this extra time, having these tools available. Let's have a look at the properties of this clip now so we can fit the width. Let's have a look at our framing. Might want to give our sergeant a little more headroom to begin with. So we'll start at the beginning of the clip and we'll give him some more headroom. But by the time he sits down and leans in, I'm going to go back down and reframe this so it's a little more favourable for this eye line. So we right click on that, end keyframe, add a Bezier keyframe. Alright, all looking pretty good. All fake camera moves that no one would ever know were there. all happening in real time. Let's go to our next shot, fit the width, reframe a little. Okay, looking pretty good. Reframe it a little more even. Alright, and finally, let's go back to this one. Drop that same layout filter onto the next clip. And let's have a look at this final shot, because this is the one where I want to add some extra drama, just like we did in the previous scene. So we can fit the width here, and we're going to slowly push in on this shot. Make sure we add an easy ease keyframe at the end. Oh, it just adds so much. And that's why they use dollies in real life. Because it really does draw you in and help you feel what she might be feeling. All these editing techniques, they all make the difference. So how are we going to make this shot stand out in terms of color correction? The first thing we're going to do is bring up our scopes. And I'm just using keyboard shortcuts here, but you should be able to see a scopes shortcut here. So you just click that, toggle it on and off. So with our scopes up, we can effectively add some contrast to our scene. So we can use a YUV curve to do that. So we'll jump straight for the Y parameter, go down to the shadows and add an anchor point, dropping our shadows down to 0. And we can add a gentle S curve to bring up the remainder of our luminance values to almost hit the roof. Because remember, we do have some extreme, almost blown out highlights here, like out the window on the top of her hat, for example. But we just want to make sure they're just below 100. And we sort of want to try and curve those highlights off to try and keep the filmic look that we're going for. So if we have a look at before and after, our contrast is looking pretty good. But the problem is we need some saturation here. And what I might do is just switch to single screen mode now. So if I press keyboard shortcut number 1, I've actually created these shortcuts, number 1 and 2. You can set those up yourself in settings, user settings. You can go to user interface keyboard shortcuts. As long as you've got the category selected to all, let's just try typing dual for dual monitors. And here we go, toggle dual mode. So toggle dual mode is set to assignment number 2. And basically you can change any keyboard shortcut you like. And that's really cool. But if you don't want to do that, just go up to view and you can go single mode or dual mode. So single mode will give us a larger window to work with. Just in this instance, normally you would have an external preview monitor, previewing in 10-bit like we talked about at the beginning of this tutorial. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to work in single mode. So now we have some nice contrast, but we need to add some saturation. Now we could add saturation using a color balance slider. Now the color balance slider allows us to linearly adjust things like chrominance, brightness and contrast. So we could go to the chrominance slider and drag that to the right. But the problem is I find that the chrominance slider is adding saturation to our shadows, our midtones and our highlights all by the same amount. And I don't particularly want to do that. It's more of an aggressive overall saturation slider. So let's just go ahead and cancel that. And instead of the color balance filter, we're going to use a 3-way color correction filter. We'll drop that on top of there. Double click that, open the properties. Now we can go to the midtone saturation slider and increase that. So it hasn't really done a lot, but that's the beauty of this filter. It's quite a delicate, gentle, fine-tuning tool that allows us to change things within the scene much gentler. And that goes with contrast as well. So we can go to the black balance and lower the contrast, and you can see it's really just gently dipping those shadows down to pure black, and that's exactly what we want to do. And that's looking pretty good. Might just go ahead and press OK, and we can just duplicate that filter. Just like we did with layout tools, dragging and dropping it around, we can also grab the same filter on the same clip, drag it down onto itself, and now that's going to add 2 3-way color correctors, both with the same parameters. But what we can do now is go into the second one, and we can just default those, and we can go straight for the mids, increase saturation in the midtones only slightly like so. And while we're here, I might just want to white balance this shot a little bit because there's quite a bit of green in the shot. This back wall didn't have any green on it during the day, so I'm going to push the opposite color of green, which is magenta, into this shot like so. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and compare the before and after by selecting this preview switch. And once you've selected that switch, you can go over to the 50% value, click and drag your mouse up and down. And that's just going to show you a before and after, so that's really cool. And it's important to know that while we are color correcting, we should be working in a 10-bit color space for obvious reasons. So let's go ahead and do that. So settings, project settings. Let's make sure we're working in a 10-bit color space. So change the video quantization bitrate to 10-bit. You can do this on the fly, which is pretty cool. So now we're working in 10-bit and we're going to get a much better color range to choose from. We're just going to close our scopes now. We've got nice saturation, although our shadows are a little too saturated. I'm going to fix that a bit later. But we're going to close our scopes. I'm happy with contrast, I'm happy with saturation. What I'm not happy with though is her skin tone. Now she has beautiful skin as it is, but unfortunately the red camera sometimes can introduce some pastel-y, sort of blotchy skin tones that weren't actually there on the day. There's a number of ways to do this, but the technique I'm going to show you now often gets used in Hollywood features. It's quite an effective technique, and basically what we want to do is select the skin based on luminance and chrominance values, and then we want to desaturate the skin and then reintroduce a skin tone color. And what that's going to do is even out, see the sort of greeny yellowy patches here that weren't really there on the day. It just has to do with chroma subsampling within the camera and other issues that come into play, but basically the point is we want to fix this problem, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it right now. So there's a couple of ways to do it. Now I'm going to show you two techniques. The first way is to use a three-way color corrector, but this time we're going to use it a little differently. We're going to use the limiting portion of the three-way color corrector. Now the limiting tool, the limiting portion, allows us to select a hue range, a saturation range, and a luminance range. And if we have a look at the skin tone, we can actually make estimated guesses. For example, we know that the hue is definitely not blue. We know that the hue is around this yellowy orange color, so we could expand that range to about here. Keeping in mind that these outside handles are literally softening feather handles, and if they're hard up against the inside handles, like so, it means we're going to have a very definite range that does not roll off into any other area. But if we do sort of introduce softening edges of other colors, we're going to get a much softer edge on our key. But now that we have our hue range selected, and remember these are just estimated guesses, we're going to have a look at the saturation. So if we move our selection range down to the sort of lower mid-tones, which is where the skin saturation lies, I think this is going to give us a pretty good idea. Now remember, I'm just guessing, but I am trying to teach you how to use this tool manually. Finally, we're going to look at the luminance values of the skin. So how bright is her skin compared to, say, the highlights outside in the window or the shadows under this jacket? Well, once again, if we enable luminance, it's definitely not up here in the bright area, and it's definitely not down here in the dark area. Her skin is somewhere around here, I'm guessing. So if we turn our key on, let's see how well we did. So we haven't done very well at all, and maybe that's because our saturation levels aren't spot on. So we could shift those down a little. So that's not too bad. And our luminance range, we can start introducing brighter areas and discarding darker areas. So that's looking pretty good. Start softening in that shadow area. And the colors, we can also push them away from green and yellow, more into magenta and orange. And check it out. We've got a key. The problem is the key's a little bit noisy, a little bit blocky, and there's no real way of refining that key. So even if I turn my key off, I'm still going to show you the technique that's here, in that we can desaturate the midtones and we can change the color of our skin to whatever we like. But the problem is the key itself isn't the most perfect key. We can get a much nicer key than that. But the idea is that now that we have that key selected, no matter where she moves, those saturation, luminance, and hue limitations have been selected. So no matter what happens in the image, the adjustments that we make will follow those limitations. Let's go ahead and see how we can do this much better and make her look a lot prettier than she does right now. So we're going to delete that filter, go ahead and look at the effects. We're going to go to what's called a chrominance filter. So I'm going to drop chrominance now onto this clip. And let's open the properties of chrominance. Now we're basically going to do exactly the same thing, we're just going to do it in a different way. So if we have a look at these four buttons on the left, we can have a look at the second button, and the second button shows us a plot of color. Now this color shows us all of the color available in a video spectrum, but if we actually turn on the histogram, it's going to show us that this is the actual color available in our scene. So if this is the only color in our scene, all we need to do then is use this little selection tool and place it over the area that we want to select. So here's blue and pink, here's green and yellow, red and orange, and what we want to do is place this selection tool over the skin tone color. But before we do that, let's turn our key on, and with our key on the screen goes black because we actually haven't selected anything yet. So now we drag this selection tool over the color of our skin, and check it out. We're starting to get a pretty dirty but useful key, and I'll show you why in a second. So we can change the shape of this, make it narrower, and we can angle it in certain spots that help us choose the colors that we want. So that's not looking too bad, but remember, it's a very harsh edged key. How do we get a softer edge on that key? To get a softer range on the color selection, we need to go over to the color tab, go to the alpha, and just increase the alpha. And as you can see now, we're adding these little blue handles on our selection tool. Now those blue handles are basically a softer edge of our selection. So now if we shrink the size of our selection tool and back it off a little bit, moving it around, you can visually see that we're actually creating, or starting to create, a nice key. So that's not looking too bad, but we can refine this even more, and that's why this is a very powerful technique rather than using the three-way color corrector, because now we can go into the Effects tab and go to the shape Alpha 0, and if we slide that to the right, we can actually blur the key. And this is going to help us create a much nicer key. While we're in here also, this bar on the right hand side represents all of the luminance range in our scene. So it's disregarding color and showing us a histogram plot of all the luminance values, where the bottom of the graph represents pure black and the top of the graph represents pure white. And at the moment all of that section is being selected, so what we do is go to the top and drag it down, and if I keep going down, you'll notice it's starting to shrink our key and only select darker areas. So if we bring it up and stop about there, you'll notice we're not selecting the highlights in her hair and the highlights out in the windows. And if we sort of hold our mouse over the edge, or we go to the luminance, we can change the alpha maximum, which is the softening, just like we did on the color softening alpha. We can go to the luminance one and just drag that up a little bit, and that's just gently going to introduce brighter values. So we can drag that down. Now we've got a pretty awesome looking key. So what we can do is turn our key off, and check it out. Now we can put a filter, more than one filter, any filter we like, inside of that key. So let's go to Effects now, go to the Inside filter, go to the three-way color corrector. Let's set up the properties for that three-way, and we can go straight for the saturation of the midtones, desaturate them to get rid of that blotchiness, and then reintroduce. Now we can reintroduce that skin tone color, or any skin tone color that we like. So this is an awesome technique, and it's very powerful, and it's quite easy to learn as well. I mean, once you pick it up and you understand the fundamentals of it, you can use this not only on skin, but someone's jacket or a red car, for example. But you get the idea. So let's go ahead and have a look at trying to fix this skin up to something that we like, something super Hollywood. And let's just go ahead and reintroduce a little bit of the original skin tone there. It's looking pretty good. So we'll look at before and after, and you can see we've got that sort of overly saturated pinks and sort of green blotchiness. And then if we wipe back on our new grade, we're looking a little bit desaturated, so I might just increase saturation in the shadows a little bit, and I'm going to push a little bit more of that skin tone color in. So now I've gotten rid of the blotchiness, and I've basically got the same color skin back in, but now the color of her neck and the color of her face and all of the shadows and highlights are starting to look a little bit more uniform. We could go a little bit crazier with it just to make sure it stands out for this tutorial. It's not going to look very good, but I think you get the idea, right? And while we're here, not only can we play with color and saturation, but we can also play with mid-tone contrast. So for example, we could just brighten up her skin a little bit, give it a little bit of extra glow, as if we had like a china ball down below, or some sort of soft light source that was really helping illuminate her skin. And now you can see we've gone from that to that, and it's pretty cool what you can do with this effect. So let's press OK, and press OK again, and check it out. No matter where she moves now, her skin is all fixed, it's looking really good. And we can always just duplicate that track, delete the filters, and just have a quick look at before and after to see where we've come. So we've added contrast, we've added saturation, we've fixed white balance issues, and we've enhanced the skin Hollywood style. So next up, what I want to do is, let's just delete that duplicate that we made. How can we draw our viewer in even more? Well, let's go ahead and start adding some focus. I mean, even though we have a shallow depth of field here already, what I want to do is use a mask to enhance that even further. So I'm going to grab our mask tool, drop that on top, and I'm just going to draw a circle, a simple shape around her face, and I'm going to soften the edge of that mask by about 1500 pixels, quite a lot. And on the inside of the mask, I'm going to add two filters. So let's go ahead and go to Video Filters, And to add more than one, you need to choose this Combine Filters filter and press OK. So now we have a mask. On the inside of the mask we have a filter, and that filter is Combine Filters. So what I'm going to do now is open the properties for Combine Filters, and we have the option to choose any filter we like. The first one I'm going to choose is YUV Curve, and I'm just going to add even more brightness to her face and that whole area. But I'm also just going to make sure my blacks are still black. And if we just look at before and after, I've just subtly increased brightness and maintained contrast. And then next thing I'm going to do, like I was talking about before, is increase focus. So to do that, on the inside of my mask I'm going to add sharpness, and I'm going to sharpen that up to about 18 and press OK. Now everything on the outside of that filter, I'm going to do the opposite. So on the outside of the filter, let's add two more filters, same technique. So we'll go Combine and same filters, but I'm going to do the opposite. This time I'm going to darken everything outside of her, like so. And I'm also going to soften everything outside of her. So we'll go to Blur, and we can increase blur by, let's go 100, and I'll just show you how much that's doing, which is too much. Remember, color correction is all about subtlety. We just want to back that off some, maybe to about 15, 11. Something that you can't really notice unless you're looking for it. That's the idea, right? Let's go ahead and press OK, but before I do, I might just increase the size of the mask and decrease the feathering edge a little bit to maybe 1,000, and press OK. So things are looking pretty good. Now the next thing I want to do is have a look at trying to bloom out these highlights as if I used, say, like a Pro Mist filter in front of the lens, which I didn't. But just pretend we wanted that sort of softer look on the highlights. How would we go about achieving that in post? So thankfully EDIUS has a lot of creative tools at your disposal, so if you can come up with an idea or you have something you want to try, chances are the tools are here to be able to do it. Now some of my background is some heavy post-production in Photoshop, and if you've ever used Photoshop or you're familiar with editing in Photoshop, no doubt you would have come across blending modes and how powerful blending modes can be. So right now I'm going to use a blending mode within EDIUS and show you how to create this look. So first up I'm going to duplicate this layer, so I'm just going to click, drag, press Control and let go. And what I might do is just unlink it from this other clip over here. So I'm going to press Alt-G for unlink and delete that clip. So now we have one clip above the other and they are identical, but what I might do is just delete all the filters on that top layer. So one, this allows us to have a look at how far we've come with this color grade, and next up it's going to allow us to, let me turn that back on, it's going to allow us to blend the top layer with the bottom layer. But before I do that, I want to specifically only blend the highlights. So to do that, I'm going to use a YUV curve. And with my YUV curve, I'm going to delete all color information. So I go to the color portions of my curve, and I just flatten those out. So now we have a black and white image, but what I want to do is get rid of all the midtones and all the shadows and only keep the highlights. So these are the parts of the image that I want to glow. Now we can always come back and refine this a bit later, but basically that's looking pretty good for now. Let's press OK. And all I need to do now is go Effect and just blur that a little bit. So if we blur it, and we go Effect, scroll all the way down to Keyers, open the Blending Mode folder, then we can use either Addition or Screen. Now these are both additive blend modes, and I find that Screen's a little gentler, so we're going to try Screen, and we just drop that Screen blending mode onto the transparency portion of our top track. And now if I turn this top layer on and off, you can see exactly what that's doing. It's adding a very gentle glow to everything that has a highlight, and basically that glow is depicted, and basically wherever that glow shines through depends on that top layer and how strong that YUV curve is. The other cool thing is now we can go to our blur, and the more we increase the blur, the brighter our glow, or the further our glow reaches. And if we go to our YUV curve and we increase the amount of white and decrease the amount of black, it's going to drastically change the look of our pseudo Pro Mist filter. Pretty cool. So now you can see we've got this pretty cool look that we've cooked up with a few basic filters, but we're doing it in a clever way. We're doing it in a craft editing way. We're not using presets, we're using tools that are designed for the creator. Alright, so I know this has been a long tutorial and we're going to wrap it up real soon. It was only supposed to go for 45 minutes, but we've still got a little bit of workflow stuff to cover using DaVinci Resolve. So stay tuned. I did promise you that if our shadows were sort of overly saturated, we would quickly fix that, so I'm going to do that right now. And let's just quickly go through how we can do that. Basically, we're going to use the same technique that we used to select the skin, but this time instead of selecting, say, a skin tone or a color range, all we want to do is select a luminance value. So with the three-way color corrector, let's only enable luminance values to be selected and turn our histogram on. And what the histogram shows us is where most of the saturation lies, which is in the shadows. It also shows us where our luminance values lie. It also shows us where all the color values lie as well. So this can be helpful when manually selecting different ranges. But if we turn our key on, it's going to show us the range that we're currently selecting, which is here and here. But what we want to do is only select the darkest parts of the image. So let's move this all the way to the left and just clamp this down. And what this is going to allow us to do is to only select the darkest parts of the image, and keeping in mind that we do have a little bit of our above track shining through here. So we've got the Pro Mist style filter on top of this, and that's just what's making this sort of weird glow here, but just ignore that for a second. And notice that as we clamp down this shadow area, this luminance range, we're only looking at the darkest parts of the image, like under a hat. We turn the key off. You can see this area is definitely a very dark part of the image, as is this. If we turn our key back on, you can see that that's exactly what we've selected, and that's exactly what I want to do. So basically I'm going to just feather out those shadow areas, and now we have a nice little key here that we can go, turn our key back off, and we can go to the saturation of the shadows and just completely desaturate them. This is a really clever, this is a really useful technique to clean up your shadows to make sure they're not polluted with overly saturated blues or magentas, for example. So yeah, that's that pretty much done. But before we move on, I did say that I would like to show you how we can match these shots across the board, right? So here we have a filter, and let's just disregard the Pro Mist filter for a second, so I'm going to turn that off. And what we can do is highlight all of these filters that we've created: the contrast, the saturation, the white balance adjustment, the skin selection, the focus mask, the three-way color corrector that desaturated the shadows. We can select all of those, and if we right click and go save as current user preset, what that does is, if we go back to our effects tab, you can see it's created this single filter that contains all of those filters. Another thing we can do is right click on that and go to the properties, and we can actually change the name to something like Awesome Grade 01. And now we can actually export that and save it on a USB stick, email it to your friends, whatever you need to do. But you can also just drag and drop that. So we can drag and drop that on the previous clip, for example, and let's look at how things have turned out. Not too bad. If we just duplicate this track and have a look at the difference before and after, it's actually not too bad. But there'll be a couple of problems with it. One, the mask won't be in the right place. So if we just double click that mask and make sure the mask is actually over the guy's face, and if it's not over the face the whole time, we could animate those properties. So we could animate the opacity and the strength of that mask, the position of the mask, basically like this, comes into frame, looking pretty good. And if we just jump back to about here, for example, what we can do is go to the strength and lower the strength to 0, and then by the time it comes into here, make the strength 100 again, which it already is. Beautiful. So now that mask has been animated, so that's looking pretty good. And once again, before and after, all we did was drag and drop that. And let's have a look at our key, our chrominance key, make sure that's working well. So we'll double click chrominance, turn our key on, and check it out, it's looking pretty good. But there's a couple of holes in this key, and the reason for that is our previous key did not include a brightness value this bright. So all we need to do is turn the key back on, go to the luminance value selection tool, and just increase the luminance. And as you can see, the key magically fills back in. So once you understand how these tools work, you can really quickly and effectively create powerful color grades. So now we can just switch back and forth between these two shots, and things are looking like they match pretty damn well. So to wrap things up, I just want to show you how EDIUS 7 is really expanding, not only creating better standalone software to allow you to be able to master and finish and edit to such a high level, but also being able to work with third-party software and hardware. So like being able to monitor with a 10-bit card, for example, or finishing in DaVinci Resolve, for example. So what I'm going to do now is show you that workflow and show you how efficient it really is. So I'm going to start a new sequence. Let's go back to our bin, go up to our root sequences folder, and right click, go new sequence. I'm going to rename this sequence in spiky brackets, and I'm going to call this for Resolve. And press enter. Let's double click that sequence and have a look. So here we have a blank sequence. I'm just going to stereo mix those audio tracks down, and this time what we're going to do is actually work with native red footage, and I'm doing this for a specific reason. So you'll notice that the resolution of this red footage is quite low, and that's allowing us to play it back in real time because this machine that I'm using is quite under-spec'd. It's not a very powerful machine, and I definitely don't have decent hardware to be able to decode red in real time. Although I can do that at a 16th resolution, as you can see here. So the point I'm trying to make here is, though, that not only does EDIUS edit more formats than any other editing software, it now also works with third-party software like DaVinci Resolve. So what I wanted to show you is a little workflow using native red footage, which we've imported here. Let me just right-click on this clip and go to Properties. And you can see here that it's 4096 by 2160, and we're working with red video. Pretty cool, right? So we didn't have to transcode that. It's still in its capture codec. Now remember, if we just have a quick look at this slide again, the red camera format records to red code. So we haven't actually transcoded into an intermediate codec. So the whole previous tutorial I've been using the Grass Valley HQX codec, which has given us full resolution, 10-bit color support, and real-time performance. Now we're working with a recorded format. Now, you don't have to always use an intermediate codec, and sometimes it's preferable to actually stay in this recorded format, and I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and have a look at some of this red footage now. And let's just have a look at this clip in particular. What we're going to do is drop it on our timeline, and let's just change our project back to full 4K DCI, so 4096 by 2160, and let's go ahead and press OK. So now we're working, and you can see the full frame that we recorded. And next what I'm going to do is drop another clip down here. I'm not going to edit anything useful, I'm just going to create an edit just to show you as an example as we wrap this tutorial up. And I'm going to drop a third clip down here and just trim that down a bit. Now hopefully you notice not only all these clips are very different looking, but this one in particular looks terrible because it's all green. Now I've deliberately done that because I want to show you a really cool thing that EDIUS does with native red footage. So here we've created an edit, and what I might do is just duplicate these tracks a few times just to make the edit seem a little bit more complicated. Before we sort of head over to DaVinci, I did want to show you a really cool feature with EDIUS that is unique to EDIUS that allows you to work with native red footage. But more importantly, it allows you to manipulate the metadata in RAW as if it's a plugin within EDIUS. So the white balance on this clip is completely wrong, and because it's raw, it doesn't actually matter. We can change that white balance whenever we like. If this raw clip was transcoded like this into an intermediate codec, we could try and fix that white balance. Let's just have a quick go now. I doubt I'm going to be able to do much to it. But we'll go three-way color corrector, and the way we're looking at it now is that there's a lot of green in the mids and the shadows. So what I want to do is try and push the opposite color into the scene to try and balance that out. And as you can see, maybe we can do this. Who knows? I'm still going to show you this technique regardless. There's still going to be issues. You can't recover something that bad. And we could use secondaries to try and pull out those spots on her cheek, etc. But you get the idea, right? It's pretty difficult to fix a white balance issue like that. But thankfully, we have access to the raw metadata. Now, what does that mean? Let's right-click on this original clip and choose Open. Now what that's going to do is open Red CineX, which is free software you can download. This is basically Red's answer to Red Dailies. It basically allows you to create edits, it allows you to adjust metadata like white balance and ISO, and we can actually change things and do some basic color correction in here as well. But as you can see, this is much more effective than actually trying to white balance after the information has been baked in. So as you can see now, I've got a much nicer looking image. And if we go back to EDIUS now, this is the cool part. If I just Alt-Tab back to EDIUS, the green is magically gone, and technically what we're doing here, we have the ability to affect how the image is debayed before it gets to EDIUS. Let's go back to Red CineX, and I'm just going to make it all red, okay, sort of pink. And let's go back to EDIUS now. And those changes come across instantly. This is such an awesome workflow, and it's really cool that EDIUS supports red like this. But how about we want to finish this in DaVinci Resolve? We need to finish this for cinema, and we need to export a 16-bit TIFF sequence, and we also want to use some of DaVinci's really cool color correction tools, not only its motion tracker, etc., but there's another really cool little trick that I want to show you. Right, so it's time to head over to DaVinci. How do we get our EDIUS timeline into DaVinci? Let's quickly visit that still one more time and just have a look at the intermediate codecs here. Now there's the Grass Valley HQX codec, which obviously is supported by EDIUS, but EDIUS also supports in and out Avid's DNx HD. It also will edit ProRes, but no Windows machines can export ProRes at this point, just because of Apple's licensing. But just to keep in mind that EDIUS will edit all of these intermediate codecs, but what's new to EDIUS 7 is the fact that the Grass Valley HQX codec and Avid's DNx HD codecs are both editable and transferable between different software platforms, and this is really, really cool. And we may as well just grab a music track and just drop that on the timeline as well. Just to show that EDIUS and DaVinci work well together when it comes to exporting AAFs. So we'll just expand that. We've got some waveforms here, and we've got a crazy edit going. You know I don't really mean crazy, but you get the idea, right? So we've got an edit. It has multiple tracks, multiple cuts. We can just add that as well. Duplicate that. Cool. Now, before we export an AAF, there is one little cool thing that I wanted to show you. Let's just have a look at our actress walking across the screen like this. If you're an EDIUS user, you may be aware that we can quickly and easily slow a clip down. So what I want to do is just slow this portion of a clip down to say 30%. So we right click, choose time effect and go speed. We can change the speed to 30% and press OK. And what that's going to do, let me just turn that volume down. What that's going to do is slow her down like you would expect. But the way EDIUS interpolates slow motion frames isn't that pretty, I've got to be honest. I mean, it works, it's fast, and for the most part, it creates slow motion. But as you can see here, we've got some pretty nasty ghost frames, and things just aren't looking as good as they should. So other software, like you may have heard of Twixtor, or some plugins in After Effects, they do a much better job of slowing footage down. But what's really cool is the latest version of DaVinci Resolve, even DaVinci Resolve Lite, supports what's called optical flow time resampling. So now that we've slowed this clip down, let me just prove that I have. So time effect, let's have a look at the speed. It is at 30%. What I'm going to do is just trim this back a bit, add this clip back here, and just keeping in mind that this orange bar across the top of that clip means that we have slowed that clip down by 30%. So just remember that. And let's go File, Export Project, AAF. It's now time to send this timeline and all of these clips in this order out to Resolve. Yeah, but before we do go out, I did just want to point out that we actually have mixed formats on this timeline. So most of the clips on here are native red clips. Let's have a look at that. So red video, 4096 by 2160. But the clip that I slowed down and the remainder of that clip is actually an intermediate codec. So it's Grass Valley's HQX codec. And it's 4K as well. So we're just mixing formats on the timeline, and the AAF is going to recognize that, and Resolve is actually going to recognize both of these formats as well. So let's go ahead and see if it works. So we go File, Export Project, AAF. Now we need to modify the preset here and just make sure that everything's okay. So let's click Detail, and under Detail we want to make sure that Legacy is unticked. We want to make sure that the file path is set to RFC2396. And we want to make sure that Separate Video and Audio is checked. We also want to make sure that we have both of these checked, because we do want to send out audio and we do want to send out video. And there are a number of sort of tutorials or PDFs online that show you how to do this. And they're all right in their own regard, but this method I'm showing you actually does not render any of these clips. It's instantaneous. Basically, as soon as we export this, within 2 seconds we can open up Resolve and start importing it. But the thing we don't want to do, and in my opinion, the whole point of AAF is basically transferring an edit list. I don't want to render out everything on the timeline to a separate intermediate codec. That could take weeks, depending on how slow your machine is, and if you got 6K red footage on the timeline, for example. So the point is that we don't want to render these clips. We want to keep the original clips. So it's important to make sure that that is selected here and here for the audio as well. And once that has happened, none of these copy options actually matter. So we can go ahead and press OK, And let's just name our AAF, so we'll call it Matte Complex Edit 2 and press save. And straight away that's done. So now we can close EDIUS and we can save that project. And don't read my emails. Then we can go to DaVinci Resolve. Now I'm using the full version of Resolve 11, but you can do this with Resolve Lite, no problems. The only difference is that Resolve 11 supports full 4K. It supports multiple CPU and GPU, and it also has, you know, things like remote grading and noise reduction and stuff like that. But the core components, the ones that actually matter, like color correction components and this cool little tool that I'm going to show you, they all work along with the AAF support. So let's go ahead and log in and start a new project. So I'm just going to go Untitled Project, double click that, and if we go File, Import AAF, and all we need to do is point to the place that we saved that AAF, and here it is here, Matte Complex Edit 2, and press Open. It's just going to ask us a few questions. The important one is, if you're using DaVinci Resolve the full version, we can actually make this project 4096 by 2160 and press OK, and check it out. No qualms. The whole edit, frame accurate, all the clips are all here, ready to go, just like we saw them in EDIUS. So now we can start finishing this at a much higher grade with a much higher bit depth than EDIUS supports. And we have access to Blackmagic's amazing color correction suite. So all of those tips and tricks and color correction techniques that I showed you in EDIUS can be used here inside DaVinci Resolve. And although it might look a little daunting at first, make sure you check out my blog, mattscottvisuals.com. There's plenty of tutorials on there that teach you how to use this software as well. But basically the techniques that I just showed you in EDIUS are exactly the same here in DaVinci. But let's not get into color correction. We're going to wrap up this tutorial. I've been rambling for far too long, so thanks for staying this long if you have. But there's one little thing I just wanted to show you that it's really, really cool. So let's go back to our Edit tab, and let's have a look at that clip that I slowed down. Remember I slowed down a clip to 30%? Well, here it is here, and if we just zoom in a little bit, you can actually see that the AAF and the import of AAF into Resolve has actually recognized that speed change. See that little time or that little clock icon? That is showing us that this clip has actually been slowed down. And at the moment, it's being slowed down using Resolve's standard slow motion interpolation. But Resolve actually supports a much higher quality slow motion algorithm. And the way to access that is to click on the clip once, then click on the Paintbrush and Spanner Inspector button, and that's going to expand all the properties for this clip. Let's scroll down to the bottom, go to the retime process, and let's just change that to optical flow. Now once you do that, nothing seems to have happened, but now when you scrub through this and you render this out, and trust me, it's going to take a lot longer than it would normally take to render, you're going to get a really nice slow motion, much nicer than you can achieve in EDIUS. This is just another cool little feature that I loved about the AAF export, and it's just really good to see that this workflow is really working well. Let's just quickly look at the Deliver tab, because now what we can do is finally finish our film for a 16-bit TIFF sequence. But just while we're here, we could actually render this out back to Grass Valley's HQX. And sometimes that's actually required, especially if you're creating a Blu-ray disc, or if you want to render sort of your deliverables for web or iPhone or iPad. So to send out a master file that's not necessarily for cinema, what you can do is choose single clip, and that's going to render out everything into one single mixed down clip. And you can render the video format into QuickTime. Now remember that slide that I showed you earlier, the render format is QuickTime, but the codec, so the video format is actually the container, and the codec is what's important here. So if we choose a QuickTime container, then we can go to the codec and we can actually choose Grass Valley's HQX. Check it out, it's actually in Resolve. How awesome is that? So we can also choose other formats like uncompressed, and awesomely we can also choose DNX HD, which is also supported in and out of EDIUS. So we have a great range of exporting options that are all compatible with EDIUS and Resolve. So this is really great news. So for example, we could choose Grass Valley HQX and make the compression quality at its best, and then we could render this out to a 1920 by 1080 if we wanted to. Something a bit smaller, more suitable for deliverables. Alright, so that wraps up the tutorial, guys. Thanks for hanging around for an hour and a half. I know it's been kind of boring, this one. I promise to put more exciting stuff in the next one, but hopefully you got something out of the color correction side of things and sort of understood a little bit more about intermediate codecs and how important they are, and also shed some light on some workflows that allow you to finish at a much higher grade and start working with third-party software, as well as using EDIUS as a craft editor. It's not just a dirty quick cut here and there sort of piece of software. It really is a super powerful NLE. Now there's one more thing that I sort of haven't covered, only because I'm not really an expert in this area, but EDIUS also supports other plugins such as iZotope Audio. I haven't really covered anything about audio in any tutorials, but I do plan to in the future. But basically because I know nothing about audio, or I barely know enough about audio to teach anyone. So, but the cool thing is that there's a lot of really high-end professional audio plugins that all plug straight into EDIUS, and some of the best out there at the moment are the iZotope plugins. And this stuff is so awesome. I've been watching some of the tutorials for this stuff, and what you can do with it is literally amazing. It turns EDIUS into a full audio suite, which is super cool. But then there's also the After Effects bridge that's built into EDIUS, which allows you to import After Effects filters. More importantly, the Sapphire filters, the Sapphire pack that's also compatible with DaVinci Resolve and other high-end color correction suites, all of those Sapphire effects actually work in EDIUS now because of the new After Effects bridge that has been updated. So this is really cool as well. Some of the guys at NAB and IBC demoed that to me, and it's really cool stuff, especially all the lens flare plugins, and there's just an unlimited amount of effects that you can now use in EDIUS natively. And finally, Boris Effects actually plugs into EDIUS too. So you've got a full compositing tool within EDIUS, which basically means that there are no limits. I mean, you've got high-end color correction, high-end audio editing, an amazingly fast and flexible editor, plus you've got compositing tools and third-party hardware. The future is bright for EDIUS. Bring on EDIUS 8, I can't wait. Actually have some exciting projects coming up, and I can't wait to share those with you guys. I'm going to be showing you how to get the most out of your NLE and color correction, and learn all about cinematography. Make sure you check out my blog, mattscottvisuals.com. It's the best blog on the internet. And yeah, I just posted a new post about a green screen film that I shot for Chris Bailey. So make sure you check that out. And yeah, thanks for listening, and catch you next time.